Okay, so welcome. I wanted to start off with, I know Ananya had sent an email with some little comments about Taoism. So I wanted to know if anybody else had any comments to start with, either from last week's study of the Tao Te Ching or anything, in any inspirations or anything that's popped up.
Are you going to share those comments, Michelle?
Oh, do you remember what you said? You can say them yourself.
You're testing my little gray cells.
I got them right here. There's notes. Ananya said.
Ananya said. So I had actually recommended a book to Michelle called The Dao of Pooh, if no one has heard of it.
Oh.
It was very famous in the early 80s. But it's a lovely way of describing what Taoism is through the use of using Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, and the two of them have a conversation. And then Benjamin Hoff came out with the Tay of Piglet. I think it's the Tay of Piglet, yeah. So there's the Dao of Pooh and the Tay of Piglet, and both of them are really quite sweet. So.
And then you sent an article, a suggestion for an article.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I forgot. See, I forgot. So I had found out that actually Taoism is used in many different fields. The academic article that I showed to Michelle was from a social science department that was talking about how Taoism has been used in different business practices, about how to, instead of being so rigid and so structured, to be able to allow flow to happen in a business. And actually, it's a business practice. And I don't remember, I know the article ends up talking about different ways it's used and so forth, but I can't remember all of that. So, but I thought that it was very interesting to see how Taoism has been moved into sort of like, you know, when we hear Mitch Horowitz talk about how Theosophy is in, you know, animation and or anime and so forth. But Taoism is kind of like that too. It's in different fields.
Yeah.
Jerry, you look like you have something to share.
I'm sure everyone remembers this book, right?
The Tao of Physics.
Oh yes, the Dao of Physics by
This was a very big deal when it came out.
Yeah.
Kind of showing the concurrence of an exploration of the parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism. And I got for Christmas one year, I got the Tao of guitar playing.
Electric, I hope.
Little like the Zen, that Zen also.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Right, the Zen of motorcycle maintenance.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Tennis, another one. It's funny.
Okay, so if we go, are there any other comments? Okay, so if we go to the study guide, the first two questions were kind of answered last week. I just want to touch base, see if anybody has any comments. The first one was, how do you feel about the legendary elements in Taoism, starting with the legend of Lao Tzu himself? Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Well, I enjoy reading it. Thomas Merton has a book, one of his books based on this. And I just enjoy the whole, we have a big table book on the Tao, which I enjoy reading the scripture. So I like it very much. It's very simple, you know, deep. I mean, that's my experience of it, reading the scripture. And I like it very much.
Good.
It's very helpful.
Good. Okay, so about the legendary, I think a lot of there's a lot of legends around, you know, long ago, what do you call them? Ancient leaders of movements of, you know, there's legends of Jesus Christ. There's, you know, legends of Pythagoras. Yeah. So I think it's not uncommon to have legends of great figures who started movements. Does anybody?
I think you can,
that there are a lot.
I think you can look at it even in a positive sense that these legends reflect the fact that this person was tremendously important to those who were in his circle and knew him. And that's one way of, in ancient times at least, expressing the importance of it. And it's not unknown for contemporary figures in politics and so on to have legends about them too. And you know, they can be deceptive if you take them too seriously, but if you don't, then you can see them as a way of expressing the importance, the tremendous impact that the person made.
And the second question was, are comparisons always bad? Why or why not? So I think in that part, where did I see that? Okay. So nonetheless, we must live in the world of separateness and finiteness. So we had better learn how to do so gracefully and with a minimum of mistakes. For one thing, we need to learn to avoid making too many comparisons and to receive everything that comes our way as an experience to be savored, not something to be held onto with an iron grip. So any, I mean, those are the cons of comparisons. Are there any pros to comparisons?
Before that, that reminds me Krishnamurti's approach, which of course was very Taoist and Zen. The idea that when we listen to somebody, to something, just to take it in and not start comparing with what you already know, it doesn't fit or this or that, because then we cannot appreciate the new viewpoint.
Yeah, I don't think my mind is mature enough to take a comparison in a positive way.
Well, on the other hand, Theosophy does teach that the great religions and spiritual traditions come from an ultimate common source, the ancient wisdom expressed in different ways in different cultures. And I think we can sometimes look for that too. The Tao is sort of one equivalent of what the Confucianists on the other side would have called heaven, or Brahman in the Vedanta tradition, or the Buddha nature, or particularly in the Judeo-Christian mysticism that comes out of Neoplatonism. You know, there's the ultimate one, the Ein Sof, or the God above God, as Eckhart called it. All of that, I think, are really different human ways of pointing toward the same thing. In some ways, Taoism is almost more honest than the others because it does always insist that this ultimate reality, this Tao, is beyond words, cannot be put into words, it can only be sort of pointed toward, you might say. And as a footnote, I might mention that I understand there is a Christian translation of the Chinese translation of the Christian Bible, in which the Tao is used to represent the Logos, as in the beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Logos, or Word, and the Word was God, and so on. It uses the term Tao there, which creates, to my mind, a sort of interesting bridge between that tradition and the Taoist.
So in the beginning was the Tao, and the Tao was with God. Yeah, yeah, because as you say, the Greek there for the word is logos. So that, I guess, you could compare it with Tao.
So comparison is good within comparative religions.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, that was my profession, so I don't want to say I was totally a fraud. Although I think comparison can certainly be overdone, but there is a place for looking at common themes in different traditions too.
Which scholarly academia, if that's like a
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily do. They always look for the divergent parts.
They
So
tend to look
they
more.
tend-
Well, that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
I was also reading something yesterday about one of the practices in Dzogchen in Buddhism is imagining the world and everything around you as simply a dream, a
Mhm.
fantasy. And there's a suggestion also in the Voice of the Silence along the same lines. So to me, this idea, even on page 38, the last paragraph, where it's talking about the importance of the Taoists, of the wonder and imagination, and as ways to expand our consciousness. And so it seems to me that, there are so many similarities in the essential practices of these faiths that help us to realize the impermanence of the things around us, and then in contrast, the inner world of the absolute, or the Tao, or the Bohm's implicate order, or whatever you want to, however you want to conceive of something that's beyond thought.
Any other comments? All right. Go on and get started.
Jim,
Jim has something.
Jim.
Okay, go ahead, Jim. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
HPV made the statement that everything she had learned came to her in visions and dreams. So it ties in a little bit to the Tao also.
Right. Okay, so does anyone want to start off and read the first two paragraphs? And so I would say it's Lao Tzu, if this is making you hesitate, I would say Lao Tzu and Shangzu,
Mhm.
Zhangzi. So I've made all the mistakes. So go ahead and start reading, and you don't have to worry about that.
I can read.
Thank you.
There's page 38 at the top. The first and greatest Taoist writer after Laozi was Zhuangzi or Chuang-Tzu, died 300 BCE. Little is known of him apart from his book. Zhuangzi wrote in a vivid, fanciful, and sometimes humorous style, using many devices to bring the reader into a world of expanding horizons. First, he tells of strange marvels, like in the world of Sinbad, such as an immense fish thousands of miles long that changes into a bird just as large and flies to a celestial lake in the south. He then compares this fantasy with the tiny motes in the air that make the sky blue, and with a mustard seed to which a teacup is an ocean. As the reader's imagination is wheeled violently from the unimaginable large to the microscopically small, from a fairy tale world to the homey, one gets a sense of mental vertigo. The mind is spinning and things are coming unfastened. This is what Zhuangzi wanted one to feel. For his mission was to shake the reader loose from ordinary ways of seeing things. Above all, from one's own prejudices, partial views, presuppositions, and from viewing everything in terms of oneself. To this Taoist, man is not the measure of all things. The way the universe happens to appear to a biped 6 feet tall is no more the way than the way it appears to a fish, a mote, an eagle, or a star. Only the Tao itself is a measure, and it is infinite.
Does anybody have any comments?
Oh, it's very clear.
All right, we can go on then. Nor is one particular state of consciousness more real than any other. Shuangzi said he once dreamed he was a butterfly, and when he awoke, he was not sure whether he was Shuangzi, who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly who was now dreaming he was Shuangzi. Unlike the sober Confucianists, Shuangzi and other Taoists delighted in the worlds of fancy, of fabulous birds and fish, or wizards who could fly over the clouds and mountains of immortals. In their reaction against ordinary conventions of thought and behavior, and their affirmation of the power of wonder and imagination to expand one's consciousness, they soon found it was easy to affirm the most extraordinary ideas, the possibility of deathlessness, the reality of supernatural forces, and so Maria touched on this, the delighted in the worlds of fancies and islands of and the immortals. And I think we'll touch on in the next question, in the next practice, more about immortality. I have a note here. It sounds like what they wanted to do was shake the reader loose from ordinary thinking, from one's own prejudices, partial views, presuppositions, and that was a lot of what I Krishnamurti tried to do.
For me, this was the idea of exercising the full capacity of the mind. And it's suggested even that with perfect control, one can expand the mind into unimaginable horizons, and yet, if needed, look into the microscopically small. And so it just seems to me as though this was a wonderful practice in a way of allowing the mind to fly, and then also to ground itself in something very earthy and very homey.
I'd like to.
It's so much more fun
Yes.
than grim and sober and concentrated. Sorry, Robert.
Oh, yes. I'd just like to mention this bottom paragraph on page 38, the comparison with the so-called sober Confucianists. And sorry, I don't have my books at hand because all of my books, including the Tao Te Ching, are packed in boxes. But from what I recall, there is a passage in the Tao Te Ching in which the author compares the Taoist approach to the Confucianist, much to the disadvantage of the Confucianists. Just to give one example, the Confucianists, of course, believed in rules and right relationships of parent to child, husband to wife, older and younger brother, and that sort of thing. Whereas the Taoists believed in keeping all of that flexible and sort of living without words out of the inner nature of life itself. For example, the Tao Te Ching says that Confucianists say that children should obey and respect their parents. But anybody can realize that if you make something like that into a rule, then children are going to want to find ways to subvert it, to argue back, to go their own way. He says instead, don't make that a rule. That will only lead to trouble in the family and in the state, but rather simply live in harmony without words, without rules, any more than bare minimum, and just let things take their natural course, and then children will naturally want to relate well to their parents, to be like their parents, and so on. That's an example, I think, of what all of this is about.
Thank you.
I really like that last paragraph, because when you think about it, sometimes we're studying so hard and working to learn how to shift from our lower mind to our higher mind. I mean, it almost seems difficult. But then if you think back when you were younger and you started reading this type of material, with a lot of imagery, it would happen all by itself. All of a sudden, you just were in a place that you normally weren't, without even making any effort or taking any preparation or anything. It was a very natural process that seemed natural. You know, when you think back, you're thinking back about even reading like Tolkien.
Yeah.
When I first read him, you know, you'd go to a math class, your lower mind was all fired up, and then you'd run home and open the book and start reading like crazy, and you were somewhere else without having to make any effort to it. It seems so natural process. Problem was you couldn't figure out how to stay there.
Yeah.
You always came back to the lower mind, which is all right too, but I miss those days. So.
Well, meditation helps that.
Yeah, the Confucianists believe that the supreme good is a good social order, a good state based on right relationships. And certainly there was something of value to it. It survived in basic organization of China for some 2,500 years, and there's still an awful lot of it in the People's Republic and the way it works. But the Taoists took the other side, said the ideal is not a good social order, but rather right relationships, A, to nature, and B, to the inner life of one's mind, this world of fantasy, of the fabulous and dreamlike and so on, which it references. And I suppose there's a place for both. They used to say that a Chinese Mandarin would be a Confucianist at work and a Taoist on vacation, because that's a good philosophy to take into the woods or whatever you do on vacation. And I think there's something to be said for the fact that both of these two sides sort of coexisted in China, and I think in a way needed the other, but both had something to really contribute to one's way of life. Sort of like in the 60s, we talked about the establishment and the counterculture, and Confucianism is the establishment, Taoism, the counterculture in Chinese history.
That's actually something I was wondering, how practical the Taoist view is in organizing people, a community or a country, because it sounds very nice, but I don't know how practical it is. It's great for vacations, but working, you need very mature people to be able to do that.
Don't you think it could have been like a seed? Because we'll get to the last question, I believe, is what would an ideal Taoist society be like? And to me, it's a lot like the writings of Man, Whence, Whither, and How, for the coming of the next evolutionary cycle, how they will live. It will flow more. There's even talk that there aren't walls on the houses, and so. All right. Okay. So does anyone want to start this in here? Is question number 3. In what way do you think immortality should be a goal of spiritual practice? So if somebody wants to read, and then we can talk about the question or any other insights you have.
Where are you starting to read? On the top of the page there?
Yes.
Okay. A later Taoist thinker, Gehong, and that was 283 to 343 CE, put it plainly enough. One of his writings consists of a fictional debate between a Taoist and a Confucianist on the possibility of immortality. The rationalistic Confucianist argues that every living thing anyone has ever heard of dies, and therefore belief in immortality is untenable. It's nonsense, but untenable nonsense. But the Taoist responds that there are exceptions to every rule. And we know so little of the vast universe, we can hardly say that the life cycles of the things we know tell us all there is to know about life. In effect, the Confucianist says you can't prove immortality. In the Taoist, you can prove there isn't immortality. For the Confucianists, the instinctive response is the safe, rational, common sense answer. And for the Taoists, the romantic, speculative approach open to non-rational, even sensational possibilities. The opening shows the way Taoists went. This opening shows the way Taoists went. It became the philosophy and religion of poets, artists, alchemists, magicians, popular cults, and immortals.
Thank you.
Welcome. Hmm.
Comments on immortality? I guess for me, the question would be, what are we talking about? What is immortal? You know,
Yeah.
we're talking about this body, this personality, these feelings, or are we talking about the immortality of the soul?
One thing I liked about Susan Johnson's lecture a couple of weeks ago on Taoism was that she did refer to many aspects of popular religious Taoism, as in the next section here, but it also refers to immortality, the three pure ones, the yellow emperor, all of that, not only the philosophy of the Tao Te Ching. And I think it's interesting to note that one goal of popular Taoism, at least, has always been immortality, or at least longevity to the fabulous extents. All of the gods in Taoism were once human beings who attained this kind of immortality or extreme longevity. And they still talk about that in connection with the martial arts and all sort of things.
Yeah, the idea, what Susan said, is that, you know, the search for the elixir of life, like a physical elixir of life. So at least in the way that is interpreted popular in a popular way, it seems to be immortality of the body.
Okay. Does anybody want to read the next paragraph, starting religious Taoism?
I'll go ahead and read.
Thank you.
The Taoist religion of China presents a rich and colorful face. Perhaps no religion in the world has had a vaster pantheon of gods, many said to have once been human beings who became immortal and finally reached divine status. The supreme deity was the Jade Emperor, a personal high god. Around him was his court, the three pure ones, Laozi, the Yellow Emperor, mythical first sovereign of China, and Bangu, the primal man. The eight immortals, very popular in art and folk tales, and gods of literature, medicine, war, weather, and other attributes. The gods and immortals lived in numerous heavenly grottos, in islands of the blessed to the east, in the Shangri-La of the mother goddess in the west, deep in the mountains.
No one has any comments. Rosanna, do you want to go ahead and read the next one?
Sure. The priests of this faith were a varied lot, affiliated with several different sectarian strands and possessing different specialties. Some were celibate and monastic, others married. Some were contemplative, concerned above all else with harmonizing themselves with nature or perfecting in themselves the seeds of immortality. There were Taoist hermits rumored to be hundreds of years old. Some were custodians of lavish temples with huge and ornate images of the Jade Emperor and other deities. To these temples, believers would come to receive divination, have memorial services performed on behalf of their departed, and worship at important festivals, which were also occasions of community carnival and feasting.
Thanks. Any comment? Okay.
Even today, there is a lot of what could be called like tantric Taoism, which has to do a lot with powers and energies and things like that. I remember that, you know, my only familiarity with Taoism was the writings of Lao Tzu and Jiang, and there doesn't seem to be anything related to that and alchemy and all of this in those writings. But I guess that fluid, you know, worldview that Taoism has gave rise to this all these other aspects. of magic and all that.
Behind all this lay the affirmation of immortality and of immortal entities, a very important theme of religious Taoism. For believing that the Tao is immortal, the faith held that if one could harmonize oneself perfectly with the Tao, one could share in its immortality. That meant, first of all, completely balancing within oneself the yang and yin energies, the male and female forces that make up the Tao, and which in the great Tao of the universe are totally harmonized. To achieve the ultimate goal of harmony and deathlessness, religious Taoism offered three main avenues: alchemy, yoga, and merit. So okay, that was my question. Alchemy referred to the preparation of elixirs posed in combination with spiritual preparation to circumvent death through manipulation of yin and yang and the 5 traditional Chinese elements: earth, wood, water, fire, and metal. The central motif of Taoist yoga was holding the breath to circulate it through the body inwardly, awakening the gods of various physical centers, and finally uniting it with the semen to produce an immortal spiritual embryo, which emerged as new life within the self. The old mortal shell then fell away like the chrysalis of a butterfly. Diet based on yang and yin considerations and sometimes sexual practices of the tantric sort to balance yang and yin through exchange of bodily fluids were important supports of this process. So I forgot what I was going to say. Any comments? Additions? Yes. It was a good thought.
Well, there are places
Robert.
that teach this kind of Taoist yoga and energy and so on in America as well as in China. I've heard 1 or 2 lectures on it.
So,
Of course, there's some also well-known exercise practices that really have a kind of Taoist basis in it. Tai Chi and Tai Chi Chuan and so on.
right. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment. One of the things we know is that Confucius himself was a student of the Tao. And in the Taoist tradition, there is an emphasis put upon an internal connection to the divine, and thereby a fluidity and a flexibility in living a life. And then and so Confucius was a student of this. And then somehow or another, the teachings of Confucius himself over the centuries, probably long after he died, became more and more crystallized until a society became, and the religion itself became the inversion of the Taoist tradition, where it was rule bound, and there was no internalization of the inner meaning of the Tao and of the spirit, you might say. And the emphasis was put on obeying rules, following rituals to the T, until it became almost ridiculous. So I think HPB talks about this in a variety of places. There's this whole process that human beings go through of taking pure teachings and inverting them and crystallizing them. And the story of Taoism and Confucianism, I think, tells that story, illustrates that point that she makes about that.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Does anybody want to read at the top of the page, the masses?
I think Pablo wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Pablo?
Oh, well, I was to tell that there is a beautiful story in the epic book of Gilgamesh about the elixir of life. And after all the struggles of Gilgamesh to when he found already the possible way to get the elixir of life, he snake take away what could be the elixir of life. So he was a little bit unhappy about that, but in a certain way, he accepted and he became a better person after that. The other thing is also Borges, he wrote short stories about the immortality, to went to some place. It's a short story, but it's the way to find the immortality. And then at the end, he found out that he don't go to look for anything because we already are immortals. And the other thing is in the short paragraph, few minutes ago, when there is a citation about the short story of Chuang Tzu about the dream, that Chuang Tzu dream about a butterfly. And when he wake up, he don't know if it was the butterfly dream about Chuang Tzu or Chuang Tzu dream about the butterfly. What happened is, in this story, is Chuang Tzu, he don't choose a tiger or another animal. He chose the butterfly. Why he chose the butterfly? And according to the some commentaries about this short story, because there is many ideas about this one from the point of view of psychologists. And so he chose they think he chose the butterfly because the butterfly is fragile like a life, all life is fragile. It's a very precious to be human. And so the butterfly, he was very intelligent to choose the butterfly in that sense. That is what I want to say. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Wouldn't that be because the butterfly goes through a transformation from the earthworm to the ethereal butterfly? It's always a powerful metaphor for transformation. Even watching butterflies is transforming. It's tremendous.
I have something to say.
Yes, sir.
The seeds that were mentioned here about that the Taoists are involved with, I think they called them seeds, did they not?
What?
Anyway, there's something HPB wrote about called the Aja, AJA, which she says are self-generated and self-existent. And she goes on and talks about how from them are emanated the Dian Chohans and so forth. And I was looking for my copy of the glossary. I couldn't find it, but I think she talked about there being three ajas, seeds that are in the human heart also. So maybe that's what the Taoists are driving at, trying to awaken those or merge with them, whichever.
It says right here, some were contemplative, concerned above all else with harmonizing themselves with nature or perfecting in themselves the seeds of immortality.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, that's good.
I
Yeah.
think it's interesting that he mentioned the heart here, because earlier in our reading, I could see that the simplicity that they were achieving, or even when they spoke about the imagination and stimulating the imagination, that it helps you drop down from the mind into the heart. And I thought that was very beautiful.
So, thinking about the concept of immortality, because most of the time when we think of getting the elixir of life, we are thinking of prolonging this particular life. I got the impression from reading some of the Taoist passages is that there's also that concept of the merging with the all, like the returning back to the ocean or merging back into the ocean. So, for example, the Tao Te Ching would say the practice of Tao in the world is like a flowing back to the sea. So I think that that's a beautiful way also to think of immortality, is that it's not this personal immortality. It's the gaining of that sense of the oneness, which is the immortal.
Beautiful.
Right, it's at the top of page 40. Anybody want to read?
I can read it.
Okay.
The masses, which had less access than elite adepts to alchemy and yoga, might strive toward immortality through accumulation of merit by the performance of good deeds. Merit which could be wiped out in the eyes of the stern judges of the underworld by even one misdeed. Some popular temples had a large abacus or calculating machine to remind the faithful of the reckoning to come. The image of immortality was as picturesque and concrete as the means toward it. Immortals, often portrayed as wise, white-bearded sages, as wizened ascetics, or even as portly, clowning wise fools, might live in out-of-the-way corners of this earth as well as in heaven. Taoism consistently hovered between the deep natural wisdom of Laozi and the delightful fairy tale atmosphere of its innumerable legends. Perhaps the two sides are not as far apart as one might think, for the tradition well recognized that the fullness of human life and wisdom requires a touch of fantasy and color as well as rigorous thinking. Today, Taoism flourishes on Taiwan, and reportedly there are also some active temples and monasteries on mainland China. I've read more about those, and there are many that are flourishing there now. Despite repression of religion earlier in the communist era, Taoism is a culture as well as a religion, and is also expressed both in China and abroad in painting, poetry, various occult arts, and in countless folk tales, some of which are now popular movies. Taoism has a vogue in the West as well, manifested in brisk sales of the Tao Te Ching, the popularity of the martial arts, and the Taoist yin-yang symbol, and even the common use of the word Tao and Taoist is in books like the Dao of Pooh and the Taoist on Wall Street. Whatever the future of the religion, the Taoist mystique will doubtless live on. And just as a footnote, I'd like to add to that, that in fact, I think we tend to underestimate the great influence that Taoism has on popular culture in America and elsewhere, maybe outside of China. The popular movies that emphasize, like,
Kung Fu.
what's that? Yeah, not only Kung Fu movies, but also the Star Wars series of movies with the Force, which really is the Qi, or the force that is generated in the martial arts and very closely related to Taoism. Popularity of martial arts studios, most of which have a real kind of Taoist ideology in the background and sometimes even in practice. All of those things that show that Taoism is certainly far from dead in our own culture.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe that was the like the beauty or the hidden message of Taoism, that it wasn't real popular, or had specific rules or regulations. It kind of just
Mhm.
seeped into culture, unknowingly.
Yeah, you're right. That would be a very Taoist way of going about it. You wouldn't have Taoist preachers on street corners or anything, but you have a kind of sneaking in the underground and martial arts studios and movies and things like that, which hardly mentioned and yet is there.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to comment also a little bit on what Pablo Minity said about the dream, the butterfly dream.
Right.
And I had the thought that the other evening, I had a dream in which, in a portion of it, I was in a snowstorm. And that storm was so real. It was so vivid that when I awoke, I was somewhat disoriented, waking from that dream, and wasn't sure what was more real. I was confused because the dream itself was absolutely vivid, and so it seems to me that this practice of is important in that it helps us to realize that we can be comfortable in various states of consciousness, that we can be centered, whether we're here at the physical level or whether we may be in another dimension, in another reality altogether, but we can still stay balanced and observing, and in a way in charge. We don't need to be swept away, no matter what dimension we happen to be working in at the moment. And also in relation to Elena's comment on the merging, it seems to me that this is all working with these various states of consciousness are the natural preliminary to also being able to move into states of communion with other beings and other forms of life without being drawn out of our own essential nature, but maintaining a sense of individuality, even as we begin to lose that sense in our relations with others. I mean, becoming more empathic, more compassionate, more present, being balanced. When yin and yang are balanced, it seems to me that we're much more useful in whatever needs to be done. We're just not, we're less preoccupied with the things around us and more able to maintain a sense of stability, even amidst chaos and all kinds of cyclic and random activities and crises.
Michelle,
Yes, go ahead.
I found a passage that is supportive of what the last few comments from students have made. This is verse 39
Of what?
of Tao Te Ching.
Okay.
I'll just read half of it. And it's beginning of the Te Ching section, and it's the verse before it is describing the virtuous man and sages, and describing sages. And it goes on to say, from ancient times, these sages attained oneness. Heaven attains oneness and became clear. Earth attains oneness and became calm. Spirits attained oneness and became potent. The fountains attained oneness and became full. The 10,000 things attained oneness and fecundity. Kings and lords attained oneness and became sovereign. All are what they are by virtue of oneness. If heaven were not clear, it would shatter. If earth were not calm, it would splinter. If spirits were not potent, they would perish. If fountains were not full, they would dry up. If the 10,000 things were not fertile, they would die out. If kings and lords were not sovereign, they would stumble. Thus, humility is the root of greatness. So, I mean, this means many things, and you could spend weeks thinking about this, of course, but it seems to show that within this idea of unity, however we might describe it or think of it, there's a power to it. And just a last comment is that the whole Asiatic spirit, in contrast much to the West, puts an emphasis on community and the whole, and society as a whole. As witnessed is the way we've responded to the COVID problem. The Asian nations have done far, far better in working together to try and find ways to slow down the disease, where in the West, we're struggling to get along with each other and just put on a mask, for heaven's sakes. So I think you could safely say that Taoism, although not being a religious tradition that's followed by many, but it's seeped into the very pore of the Asiatic spirit. It lies kind of quietly behind the scenes in the cultures of the East in general.
Anything to add before we go to the last part? Okay, so Taoism and Theosophy. Taoism and Theosophy have resonated with each other in several ways. Theosophical thinkers have long appreciated parallels between the cosmology of the Tao Te Ching, first the one, then the two, then the three, then the 10,000 things, and that of the secret doctrine and other esoteric sources. A translation of Lao Tzu's and an essay on Shuangzi by the Theosophist Walter R. Old was published by the Indian section of the Theosophical Society as early as 1894. More broadly, Theosophists may appreciate parallels between the Taoist immortals and the masters or adepts of Theosophy, regular human beings who, by dint of great dedication and spiritual effort, attain higher initiations, who may live in this world as quiet but powerful helpers, or have chosen to ascend to the inner heavenly planes, but in any case are pioneers of human evolution. Theosophists today also have come to appreciate the ecological and lifestyle admonitions of the Taoist tradition. As we have learned the importance of simple living in harmony with nature and of respecting the ebb and flow of natural cycles, we have realized the Lao Tzu and his spiritual kindred had a similar vision over 2,000 years ago, but is a lesson to which we can continually have recourse. The Tao Te Ching has been translated into English more often than any other book except the Bible. And as I was reading, there are many other places, where we can see similarities between Taoism and Theosophy. Does anyone have any other ideas on that?
Like in the I Ching, there are books on cosmogony associated to the I Ching that are just read like the Secret Doctrine. They are very similar, more complex than just from the 1, the 2, and the 3. They have a whole cosmogony that is quite abstract and metaphysical, and it reminded me of the Secret Doctrine.
Pablo Maniti? Oh, you're muted.
Do you think I can read one chapter? I can read
What's a chapter?
chapter 67.
Does that mean like a
Small.
We're not talking chapter in War and Peace.
No, is
I think it means verse.
They say, no, they say chapter because verse is only one verse. One line is a verse. I think that is, I understand for verse. Well, it's 67 and it's not too long. And I think it go very well with Theosophy. And see, many of these parts of the Tao Te Ching are very similar, let's say, with the voice of the silence or with other books, the Secret Doctrine, where there are all these instructions. This one says, everyone under heaven says that my Tao is great and beyond compare. Because it is great, it seems different. If it were not different, it would have vanished long ago. I have three treasures which I hold and keep. The first is mercy. The second is economy. The third is daring not to be ahead of others. From mercy comes courage. From economy comes generosity. From humility comes leadership. Nowadays, men shun mercy, but try to be brave. They abandon economy, but try to be generous. They do not believe in humility, but always try to be first. This is certain death. Mercy brings victory in battle and strength in defense. It is the means by which heaven saves and guards.
Perfect.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have a comment on that or any other part of Taoism and Theosophy or anything else?
Just the idea that the Tao Te Ching is another expression of Theosophy. I think if rightly understood, if we read it in the right spirit, it's communicating the very same ideas we've been studying in other places, just in a new way, in a different way.
I'm always interested into the society that these ideas came into, you know, how they say that the source or the ancient wisdom is brought out by a teacher who can teach to that community or to that culture using their words and their ideals. So obviously the culture that came in with Taoism is quite different than the culture that came in with Confucianism, even though they don't seem to be far apart. I don't know if that's a valid statement.
Well, let's say Schopenhauer wrote 3 very big volumes. And he say when he finished, this going to entertain humans for a long time. But I think what Laozi did with this small volume is more on 3 volumes or all the philosophy of the world. And is easy, is difficult, and also easy depend our education, depend our assimilation of all the cultures of the world. So I think Laozi synthesize all the knowledge of the world in this simple paragraph. And you can learn about immortality, about philosophy, about death, about work, about to be better. His philosophy is also in some way simple. Like the Dalai Lama say, my religion is kindness. And Lao Tzu could be, my philosophy is to be good, to be great without say anything. Do your work without too much excitement. Be nice, be gentle, be good to others. And I think that is the message in crypt in this volume. Thank you.
Any last words? Okay, don't anyone go anywhere. I just want to stop recording.